They don't have anything, and everything's shaved off, so there's no hiding anything. Did any of you go examine Pastor's head last week? After we talked about it. Debbie did. Is he clean?
Yeah. I had a really good friend who had cancer, and John and I would take her, she was a single woman, we would take her to her treatments, and on one of the floors, there was an AIDS ward and a sleep center, and then her treatment center. And so we would get off, and for a while John had some spots that had to be treated. He looks like he belongs in either the AIDS ward or the cancer ward. But my friend, when nurses would say to him, oh, no, y'all need to take him to the sleep study, because if he preaches for a while, they'll all go to sleep.
Oh, that's funny.
You can tease him about his hospital head. That was about 10 years ago.
Okay, so this person that's declared clean is kind of in limbo. He's kind of clean, kind of not clean yet. He's not purified. Kind of in limbo. So there were several times that they would shave their heads. They would shave their heads to remove uncleanliness, like here. If they had taken a temporary Nazirite vow, a Nazirite vow is like what Samson took, but his wasn't temporary. But you could take a vow like that temporarily. At the end of your vow, you shaved your head. A wife that was captured in battle, they shaved her head. It was a sign of mourning, or it was a symbol of humiliation and defeat. So those are the times they would shave someone's head. So in this case, everybody's seen the evidence that the person is well and that he hasn't relapsed. In a way, this leper looks like a newborn baby, a born again baby. So that was interesting. Verses 10 and 11.
On the 8th day, he must bring 2 male lambs and 1 ewe lamb, a year old, each without defect, along with 3/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil for a grain offering, and 1 log of oil. The priest who pronounces him clean shall present both the one to be cleansed and his offerings before the Lord at the entrance to the tent of meeting.
Okay, so after 7 days, 8th day, you bring 3 lambs, 2 guys and a girl lamb, and oil and flour. Now an ephah is somewhere between 5 and 20 pounds. There's disagreement. So it's not a little bit, it's quite a bit of the grain. It's also called an omer. A log of oil. Does anyone's version use a different word than log of oil? That's about 10 ounces.
It says a third of a quart.
A quart?
Third.
A third of a quart.
Mine says 10 ounces or a third of a liter. So,
Yeah, 0.3 liters.
0.3 liters.
yeah. Okay, so.
Mine says 1 log.
A log. Yeah, it's about a third of a liter or pint. Or,
Did I miss that? You probably already.
that's okay. Yeah, mine said, and Janice said a log, mine says a log. It keeps saying the priest cleanses him. Well, we know it's not the priest who really cleanses him, it's God. Only God can make someone clean, make them righteous. So this is more cleansing, this time at the tabernacle, more sacrifices. Gotta acknowledge what's happening. Let's look at verses 12 through 14.
And the priest shall take 1 male lamb and offer it as a trespass offering, and the log of oil, and wave them as a wave offering before the Lord. Then he shall kill the lamb in the place where he kills the sin offering and the burnt offering, in a holy place. For as the sin offering is the priest's, so is the trespass offering. It is most holy. The priest shall take some of the blood of the trespass offering, and the priest shall put it on the tip of the right ear of him who is to be cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot.
Okay, we saw that before. But we saw that in association with a priest becoming ordained. So it's a little different this time. This time it's the leper. It's like he is becoming a new creature, cleansed again, like we'd become. So we saw these offerings before, the trespass offering, the sin offering. We've seen how they were done, chapters 5 and 7. So now it's happening. And the only difference is the thing with the blood on the thumb and the toe and the right ear for the leper. But everything else is the same. Verses 15 through 18.
Then the priest shall take some of the log of the oil and pour it into the palm of his own left hand, and dip his right finger in the oil that is in his left hand, and sprinkle some oil with his finger 7 times before the Lord. And some of the oil that remains in the hand the priest shall put on the lobe of the right ear of him who is being cleansed, and on the tomb of his thumb. Put it on his tomb, yes. Just put them away. And on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot, and the top of the blood of the guilt offering. 18.
Yes.
And the rest of the oil that is in the priest's hand, he shall put the hand of him who is to be cleansed. Then the priest shall have anointment for him, atonement for him before the Lord.
Okay, so we saw sprinkling before, but that was with blood. Now this time it's with oil. And he's taking his fingers and sprinkling 7 times. So remember how much oil there was? It was a log of oil. So 1/3 of a liter. So it won't take much to dip your fingers 7 times and sprinkle. So the rest gets poured on his head. And it's a bald head. So it's not getting in any hair, but it's still a mess. So oil is associated with the Holy Spirit. But this oil was sprinkled on top of the blood that had already been sprinkled for the trespass offering. For us, it's like the Holy Spirit comes after the blood redemption. You don't do it the other way around. Then verses 9 through 19 and 20.
The priest shall offer the sin offering to make atonement for him who is to be cleansed from his uncleanliness. And afterward he shall kill the burnt offering, and the priest shall offer the burnt offering and the grain offering on the altar. Thus the priest shall make atonement for him, and he shall be clean.
Okay, second time we've seen that phrase, and the priest shall make atonement for him. So that's an important thing, because it's repeated again. Anytime you repeat something, that makes it that much more important. So we saw this sin offering back in Leviticus 4 and 6. We saw the burnt offering described back in Leviticus 1 and 6. And then the grain offering we saw in Leviticus 2 and 6. So we've seen all these offerings. So we mentioned last week, who were the only people we see in the Bible that were in the Old Testament that were cleansed, that were ever cured of leprosy?
Miriam and Nahum.
Yeah, Miriam and Naaman. And both healed by God in a miraculous way. Now, the Jews classed miracles in 2 different categories: those that could be performed by anyone, and those that would only be performed by the Messiah. What did Jesus do? He healed the lepers. That's one of the ones, that's one of the miracles that they said only could be performed by a Messiah. Now they were saying this, God didn't give them a revelation to say those were messianic, but they felt that only the Messiah could cure leprosy. So what kind of reaction would that have gotten when Jesus cured lepers? And they thought only the Messiah could do it. Well, for some, for believers, it would be like, yeah, that's right. For others, it'd be like, what's happening? That's not supposed to happen. But it made them think. Okay, verses 21 to 25. Yeah, which one of you is taking that one?
If, however, they are poor and cannot afford these, they must take one male lamb as a guilt offering to be waved to make atonement for them, together with a tenth of an ephah of the finest flour mixed with olive oil for a grain offering, a log of oil, and 2 doves or 2 young pigeons, such as they can afford, one for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering. On the 8th day they must bring them for their cleansing to the priest at the entrance to the tent of meeting before the Lord. The priest is to take the lamb for the guilt offering together with the log of oil and wave them before the Lord as a wave offering. He shall slaughter the lamb for the guilt offering and take some of its blood and put it on the lobe of the right ear of the one to be cleansed, on the thumb of their right hand, and on the big toe of their right foot.
Okay, so again, God makes provision for the poor. Now think about the leper. They are outside the community. What kind of job can they do? They are probably not earning anything. They're not able to really do any work because who's going to take a product from a leper? So they're probably, even if they were rich before, they're probably struggling. So God made provision for them. So they could substitute 2 of the lambs. They still had to come up with one of them. The one that was used for the guilt offering still had to be a lamb in this case, but we're going to see other provisions. But if they could do this, they could go with one lamb and then grain and things like that to take the place of the other things. And then everything else was the same. Verses 26 through 29.
And the priest shall put some of the oil that is in his hand on the lobe of the right ear of him who is to be cleansed, and on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot, in the place where the blood of the guilt offering was put. And the rest of the oil that is in the priest's hand shall be put on the head of him who is to be cleansed, to make atonement for him before the Lord. 30?
No. Okay, so everything about this is the same. No difference. It was, so far the only difference in this offering is the amount of lambs. Verses 30 through 32.
And he shall offer one of the turtle doves or young pigeons, such as he can afford, such as he is able to afford, the one as a sin offering and the other as a burnt offering with the grain offering. So the priest shall make atonement for him who is to be cleansed before the Lord. This is the law for one who had a leprous sore, who cannot afford the usual cleansing.
These are the last verses about leprosy on people, thank goodness. So again, now we get to substitute 2 birds for the other 2 lambs. And then everything else is the same. Alan Ross says we can learn from the sacrifice. Anytime we're healed and restored to full participation in life and worship, it's appropriate to offer the sacrifice of praise, a thank offering. So now we're going to come to leprosy in buildings. Sounds kind of strange. That's what leprosy on the walls of a building. Yes.
Yeah.
Called mold.
Oh.
They called it leprosy. It's mold. Verses 33 through 35.
that me?
Yep.
The Lord further spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying, when you enter the land of Canaan, which I give you for a possession, and I put a mark of leprosy on a house in the land of your possession, then the one who owns the house shall come and tell the priest, saying, something like a mark of leprosy has become visible to me in the house.
Okay. Notice this doesn't apply to tents. I suppose if you had a mark of leprosy on your tent, you burnt it and built a new one. But this is a house. So once they get to the promised land and they build houses, this will apply. And it seems like there is a judgment of God on the land because of the Canaanites. And so when you read these verses, it almost sounds like God causes all these things. So the question of, here's a fancy word, causality comes into question. Does God cause bad things to happen, or does he allow bad things to happen? And there's theologians, great theologians that differ on this, and we're going to hit it hard later. But it's something, this verse makes it sound like God caused it. I tend to cite on that God allows, but because God doesn't cause sin. But we're not going to talk about this yet. We will talk about it lots in the future. So the leprosy on the wall is mold, fungus, mildew, things that we're familiar with. Because like our reaction to leprosy on the wall, it's kind of staining, kind of the same thing leprosy does to a body. So similar things there. Verses 36 through 38.
Then the priest shall command that they empty the house before the priest goes to examine the disease, lest all that is in the house be declared unclean. And afterward the priest shall go to see the house, and he shall examine the disease. And if the disease is in the walls of the house with greenish or reddish spots, and if it appears to be deeper than the surface, then the priest shall go out of the house to the door of the house and shut up the house 7 days.
Black mold. How deadly can black mold be?
Oh, very.
Yeah. In fact, Carrie and Sean, when they moved to Kentucky, there's concern that maybe there was some black mold in the house, and that maybe one of the reasons they were having such a problem. So God is putting out a really great sanitary practice. Keep mold out of your house. In fact, the Jews through the ages were really great about doing that when everyone around them wasn't. Another thing with the Black Plague, and they're clean, their houses are clean, and everyone around them wasn't. And they were blaming the Jews for causing this. Not saying, look what's different about them in their practices. But so the priest would command that all the furniture be taken out of the house before they came. It made it easier to look at the walls. Also, anything that was taken outside the house before the priest came was clean. If it was in the house and the house was unclean, it's unclean too. So you have to save your furniture, throw it outside. And if he found a problem and it was severe enough, the house had to be shut up for 7 days. Verses 39 through 42.
The priest shall return on the 7th day and make an inspection. If the mark has indeed spread to the walls of the house, then the priest shall order them to tear out the stones with the mark on them and throw them away at an unclean place outside of the city. He shall have the house scraped all over inside, and they shall dump the plaster that they scrape off at an unclean place outside the city. Then they shall take other stones and replace those stones and they shall make other plaster and replaster the house.
I was just thinking, you know, they keep taking all this stuff to an unclean place outside the camp. Oh, imagine all the stuff that's in that unclean place.
Sort of like our dumps today.
Yeah.
Although it'd be have lots of animal parts. And,
Oh, I'm sure our dumps do.
yeah, just not a pleasant place to be at all. So the priest comes back after 7 days, and if it's worse, then he says, you take out any stones that have that mold on them and get rid of them. So that means their houses were made of stone. And archaeologists say, yeah, that's archaeologically correct. About that time, they made their houses out of stone. So here's another example of archaeology backing up what the Bible says. Yeah.
And I might have missed this last, no, we were just now talking about the house. What would the priests have worn as protection? Does it ever mention that?
No, it doesn't mention that.
It doesn't have biohazard.
Yeah,
I know, yeah,
they wouldn't have had that someone, yeah.
yeah.
But I was thinking.
They were
I've done
examining leprous
construction
people.
with youth where we had to, because it could have been mold or asbestos in the house, and I had to, every hour, we had to, cover them with everything.
Mm-hmm.
Then after an hour, hose them off, put new stuff on.
Yeah.
Almost every hour. And so I'm thinking, how did the priests keep from,
It'd be interesting to see if they have anything. It doesn't mention anything.
so I was just thinking if you'd read ahead and it said
No, doesn't. And of course their houses aren't as closed up as our houses are today.
Yeah.
So,
But still scraping the
but
walls.
still,
that's gonna
yeah,
produce dust.
bringing spores up and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And the house was usually one room.
Yeah, typically.
So they could have stood in the door.
Well, and the priest is just looking. It's the guys that are taking the stones
I was
down
gonna
that
say
are
it's the other guys.
that are at more. They're the ones having to scrape, and the priest looks. But the priest has been doing lots of. I mean, he's had to examine leprous people, and you know what happens when the priest.
God
Protection.
protection.
So I was gonna say, yeah, God's grace.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So their inside walls were coated with some kind of plaster, and so they had to scrape that off and dispose of it and any stones. And then the house got a new layer of mortar and plaster on it. So hopefully that takes care of the problem. But next verses tell us what if it doesn't. And Olga, these are a lot of verses. You okay with that? Or do you want me to take it? It would be my turn next year. I'll take it, and then you get the next set of verses. Okay, I'm going to read 43 to 53. If the disease breaks out again in the house after he has taken out the stones and scraped the house and plastered it, then the priest shall go and look. And if the disease has spread in the house, it is a persistent leprous disease of the house. It is unclean. And he shall break down the house, its stones and timber and all the plaster of the house, and he shall carry them out of the city to an unclean place. Moreover, whoever enters the house while it is shut up shall be unclean until the evening. And whoever sleeps in the house shall wash his clothes, and whoever eats in the house shall wash his clothes. But if the priest comes and looks, and if the disease has not spread in the house after the house was plastered, then the priest shall pronounce the house clean, for the disease is healed. And for the cleansing of the house he shall take 2 small birds, with cedar wood and scarlet yarn and hyssop, and shall kill one of the birds in an earthenware vessel over fresh water, and he shall take the cedar wood and the hyssop and the scarlet yarn along with the live bird, and dip them into the blood of the bird that was killed, and in the fresh water, and sprinkle the house 7 times. Thus he shall cleanse the house with the blood of the bird, and with the fresh water, and with the live bird, and with the cedar wood, and hyssop, and scarlet yarn. And he shall let the live bird go out of the city into the open country. So he shall make atonement for the house, and it shall be clean. So, next trip back, if it's spread, tear the house down. Not only tear the house down, take everything outside the city. No one was allowed to use any of the material to build a new house. And once it went to that unclean place, no one was tempted to use any of it. But nothing had spread, then the house is declared clean. And then it's time for the sacrifices. We see the same kind of sacrifice with the birds here that we saw before, where they take a bird and tie it to the hyssop and dip its tail in the blood and then let it go. It takes away the uncleanliness. Now, one thing we do see in this is there are no animals killed, because a house doesn't have a relationship with God. So you don't have to restore the relationship of the house with God. Okay, but what is
killed?
Huh?
The bird was killed.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, the one bird was killed to get the blood of the other bird. But you don't. But you don't get the bulls and the and the lambs, and you get the atonement sacrifice, but not the thing about a relationship. Okay, but what if you go into the quarantined house? Now, one note it doesn't mention here is what if you accidentally go in the house? Because if you purposely go and break this, you're sinning. And if you're sinning, you are cut off from your people. Anytime we come across one of these things, it's a unintentional act. Because if it's intentional, sin, cut off. So if you unintentionally go into the quarantined house, you were unclean until evening. If you slept or ate in the house, you had to also wash your clothing. So the uncleanliness went on to the person. Yeah.
And it says again, 7 times to sprinkle.
7 times. 7 times is the number of completion and perfection. Okay. So, message for us. Get our houses clean. Get rid of the plagues. Do whatever is necessary to stop the spread before we have to be torn down. Yeah.
May I say something?
Of course.
I mean, for us can be now translated like spiritually to clean.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when we came from Orthodox Church into relation with the Lord Jesus, Protestant, we also had so many icons and pictures, St. Michael's and this and this. We have to read off from everything. And we had a cross, we were in the corner where we kneel down and kiss and so. Everything has to be cleaned out of the house. And then we grow in the relation with Jesus Christ. Now, I can say something that is really applying now. My daughter, when she moved to California in the house, after a long time, she noticed around the house there is a stepping stones. It's something like writing Chinese or I don't know, India. And then she was curious and lifted up that stones, and under stones it was some images, Buddha or something else. And she gets so disturbed in the spirit and so on. So she rid of so many heavy stones. Pretty, they are pretty one. And then she puts just by herself a little one. Believe it or not, after that, her husband started to go to church, and he got into closer relation with the Lord. And I believe that we also, I mean, myself, and I heard from others, any signing, any, how to say, from other countries, from other gods, dragon and so on, should be cleaned out from our house. This is I heard from elder, because this is, other gods, enemy of God.
Right.
I mean, this is my conviction, I'm not saying.
Yeah. Yeah, my mom used to collect Buddhas.
And you know what else? Sorry, taking your time. When her mother-in-law passed away, she was a Christian. When she was going through her house,
she found so many these, what do you call it, bones, fish bones, numberless. She was keeping in the drawers. And then also she found little Buddhas here, little Buddhas there. And then she found also pictures of Jesus and cross. So she was born. And it was so sad. We kind of not cry, like we're sad that she was a Christian, she knows Jesus, but she hold with that. And then my daughter, she just read off from everything.
Yeah. Anything that draws us away from
Yeah.
the worship
Yeah.
of God is,
Right.
yeah. For a lot of us, it's something, it could be something else.
Yeah.
But yeah. Okay, you get to summarize the whole thing
Oh,
as
I already done.
54 through
This-
57.
Okay. This is the law for any leprous sorrows cow, for the leprosy of a garment and of a house, for his swelling and the scrap and bright spot, to teach when it is unclean and when it's clean. This is the law of leprosy.
So, a summary. Couldn't we have just read those verses? but we are done with the leprosy, but oh boy, we're coming into bodily discharges now. Another pleasant chapter. But believe me, after this, things get better. So verses 1 through 3.
The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, Speak to the people of Israel and say to them, When any man has a discharge from his body, his discharge is unclean, and this is the law of his uncleanness for a discharge. Whether his body runs with a discharge or his body is blocked up by his discharge, it is his uncleanness.
Okay, in this case, when it says man, it means man. We don't get a clarification on what kind of discharges, but most of the time it was a discharge from his nether regions. Several commentaries say it refers to gonorrhea, but it would be any kind of unnatural discharge. Any kind of liquid coming out of the body that wasn't supposed to be coming out of the body. Whatever it was, it indicated some kind of disease, and the man was to be isolated so that he wouldn't infect anybody else. Notice we don't see any kind of priestly inspection, like a priest. They don't have to check that one out. It was done by the individual. And he doesn't have to leave the camp, but he does have restrictions. He's required to, before he can associate with others, he's required to be ceremonially purified when the infection is gone. So, verses 4, this is quite a bit, 4 through 12.
Any bed the man with a discharge lies on will be unclean, and anything he sits on will be unclean. Anyone who touches his bed must wash his clothes and bathe with water, and he will be unclean all till evening. Whoever sits on anything that the man with a discharge sat on must wash his clothes and bathe with water, and he will be unclean till evening. Whoever touches the man who has a discharge must wash his clothes and bathe with water, and he will be unclean till evening. If the man with the discharge spits on someone who is clean, that person must wash his clothes and bathe with water, and he will be unclean till evening. Everything the man sits on when riding shall be unclean, and whoever touches any of the things that were under him will be unclean till evening. Whoever picks up those things must wash his clothes and bathe with water, and he will be unclean till evening. Anyone the man with the discharge touches without rinsing his hands with water must wash his clothes and bathe with water, and he will be unclean till evening. A clay pot that the man touches must be broken, and any wooden article is to be rinsed with water.
Okay, so if they were unclean, they had to go through a purification thing, and they were unclean until evening. Anything they touched, if they spat on someone or something, isn't that a pleasant thought? They were unclean. You would have an unclean party, or being able to do anything associated with the tabernacle until evening. So there's 3 levels of uncleanness here. There's the man himself, then any person he comes in contact with, and then anything he comes in contact with. So an unclean person touching another person that's clean made them unclean. Jesus changed this. How many unclean people did Jesus touch? That would have been another thing that would have driven rabbis crazy, but Jesus touched them and he healed them. Think about the one with the issue of blood. She touched Jesus. She was breaking the law. Under the old law, she would have made him unclean, but he made her clean. That's why we don't have to go through all this ritual stuff in the same way.
But again, these are all good health practices too, though.
Oh, they are. If someone has some kind of bodily disorder, don't touch them. Don't touch their stuff. Yeah. And notice the person has to be honest about it. They have to self-report.
Yeah.
So
Makes you think twice about going out to other places.
COVID.
This is kind of a funny. John was going to buy an old truck. And he talked to the person for a while and described it. And you probably know this, but in Wildemar there's a nudist camp. And so when he got the address to where he was going to meet the man, it was inside. And so he called back and said, "I'm not interested." And John's like, "There is no cleaning I can ever do." Written in that truck. Oh, no, thank you. We're not interested. Like, rip out the upholstery.
Okay, verses 13 through 15.
13 through 15?
Yeah.
And when he who has a discharge is cleansed of his discharge, then he shall count for himself 7 days for his cleansing, wash his clothes, and bathe his body in running water. Then he shall be clean. On the 8th day he shall take for himself 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, and come before the Lord to the door of the tabernacle of meeting, and give them to the priest. Then the priest shall offer them, the one as a sin offering and the other as a burnt offering. So the priest shall make atonement for him before the Lord because of his discharge.
Okay, so 7 days after an abnormal discharge, the man could become ceremonially clean. And this was a small offering, two turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, which apparently was very affordable. And they were offered as a burnt offering.
Well, the chances are they had some of the diseases or what, they didn't have a lot of money to begin with because they were doing a lot of wrong things.
It doesn't necessarily mean anything.
It might not have been gonorrhea. Could have been something else. Could have been, who knows what it was. Any kind of leakage that wasn't good.
Rich or not.
Yeah.
Yes.
Rich don't get any benefits that the poor do. They still cheat and do all that stuff.
Yeah. Okay, verses
Right, yeah.
verses 16 through 18.
If a man has an emission of semen, he shall bathe his whole body in water and be unclean until the evening. And every garment and every skin on which the semen comes shall be washed with water and be unclean until evening. If a man lies with a woman and has an emission, am I saying that right?
Mm-hmm. Emission.
As an immediately.
She keeps laughing, so that's why I'm like, am I saying?
No, it's just the subject matter.
Okay, I've seen that both of them shall bathe themselves in water and be unclean until evening.
Okay, so
Good health
You paused
practices.
like right before.
Yeah.
You just offered it because you started off and I was like, am I? Okay.
So this is either accidental or on purpose. So if a man had relations, and it's presumably with his wife like he was supposed to, he had to cleanse himself, and he and his wife were considered unclean. Now, it's not saying God doesn't approve of sex.
Again, it's good health practices.
It is good health practices. So this included the priests. When they had relations with their wives, they were unclean for the day. And they couldn't participate in any activity at the temple while they were unclean. This really separated them from their surrounding cultures, because the surrounding cultures had ritual prostitution. So they considered the opposite. So the man and wife would both have to cleanse themselves and spend a little time away from ceremonial activity. That was it. We're done with men's stuff. Now we're on to the women. Verses 19. Mia, how do you keep getting these?
No, this is Millie.
Oh, Millie. Oh, okay. 19 through 23. Yeah.
When the woman has a discharge, and the discharge in her body is blood, she shall be in her menstrual impurity for 7 days, and whoever touches her shall be unclean until the evening. And everything on which she lies during her menstrual impurity shall be unclean. Everything also on which she sits shall be unclean. And whoever touches her bed shall wash his clothes and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the evening. And whoever touches anything on which she sits shall wash his clothes and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the evening. Whether it is the bed or anything on which she sits, when he touches it, he shall be unclean until the evening. And if any man lies with her, and her menstrual impurity comes upon him, he shall be unclean 7 days, and every bed on which he lies shall be unclean.
Okay, so we all know what this subject is about. So she's ceremonial, impure, one time, 7 days a month, about. So one great thing about this is she kind of got a vacation. 7 days of no housework, no childcare, no cooking.
Can we put this back into practice?
Yeah. Yeah. No marital relationships. 7 days. She didn't have to go outside the camp, but she kind of isolated herself in her tent. And everything she touched in her tent was unclean until everything was over and she was made pure again. Now, if a man had relations with his wife, and it says, and her menstrual impurity comes upon her. So it's like, oops, she started, and yeah. If a man purposely has relations with his wife while she's in this time period, that's sin outside the camp. But if it's accidental, like, oops, then he's unclean. And we're going to see some of this spelled out in chapter 20. Oh boy, we get to revisit this. Ezekiel 18:6 also discusses it, that a man is to avoid relations with his wife during this time. Under the new covenant, this doesn't apply to Christians now.
Audrey, I was reading someplace the other day, and I was just trying to think where. But some of the Indian tribes, at least one of the Indian tribes, this one I was reading about, the women went in a tent and stayed in a tent for the 7 days. And so I've been told that when women live together, like you have 5 daughters or whatever, they usually all have at the same time.
Yeah, it goes up by the alpha woman.
Yeah, you seek.
So
I have a house full of women. Yes,
yeah,
it is true.
And so all of the women got to be in the tent at the same time, and they loved it.
Yeah.
It was their time to be together, to get to know each other, to bond. I mean, we might say, and isn't that interesting?
And
I used to have a friend, we used to joke that King Solomon knew exactly when to go to war, because war was better than his house.
Yeah. So besides being a time of sexual restraint, it was good hygiene too.
Yeah.
So
and a relaxing time for the ladies to get it all back together again.
Yeah.
It's,
And again, we wish it would come back.
I'm thinking on a whole nother part of this, but how the schools now are teaching about sex and this type of thing. this would be absolutely awesome, because in here, it does say, when he sleeps with her, when he is with her, not her and he and it.
Yeah.
It is he and her. So it confirms right there, hello, people, you know?
Yeah.
I just think, I thought that was really cool. The whole time I'm reading it, it was nice, because you are reading about menstrual and all of this, but even as gross as that is and all this, it's a he, not, it's specified.
Yeah.
And it sounded so much better. Yeah, I'm sorry.
No,
Okay.
that's true.
So let's go on to when it's not normal, verses 25 through 27.
We'll leave that part out. No.
Where did we leave off? Oh,
25 and 27.
25 to 30.
When a woman has a discharge of blood for many days at a time, other than her monthly period, or has a discharge that continues beyond her period, she will be unclean as long as she has the discharge, just as in the days of her period. Any bed she lies on while her discharge continues will be unclean, as is her bed during her monthly period, and anything she sits on will be unclean as during her period. Anyone who touches them will be unclean. They must wash their clothes and bathe with water, and they will be unclean till evening.
Okay, so this is pretty much, makes sense. It follows along with what happens with a guy. If there's an abnormal discharge, you're unclean till it clears up, and then you still have to get purified. And everything she touched became unclean. It doesn't say she can't touch anything. It doesn't say it's a sin to touch anything, just that anything she touches becomes unclean at the time too. Okay, verses 28 and 29.
But if she is cleaned of her discharge, she shall count for herself 7 days, and after that she shall be clean. And on the 8th day she shall take 2 turtle doves and 2 pigeons, and bring them to the priest to the entrance of the tent of meeting.
And 30.
Oh, okay. And the priest shall use one for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering. And the priest shall make atonement for her before the Lord for her unclean discharge.
Okay, so after the discharge ends, the abnormal discharge ends, there's another 7 days of uncleanness. And so the cleaning and ritual sacrifice thing are the exact same we saw for the man. And again, notice abnormal discharge requires a sacrifice. The normal discharge for both the man and woman only doesn't have a sacrifice, only the cleansing. Okay, Debbie, you get the summary statement. So 31 to the end of the chapter.
Thus you shall separate the children of Israel from their uncleanness, lest they die in their uncleanness when they defile my tabernacle. That is among them. This is the law for one who has a discharge, and for him who emits semen and is unclean thereby, and for her who is indisposed because of her customary impurity, and for one who has a discharge, either man or woman, and for him who lies with her who is unclean.
Okay, so none of these things in themselves are sinful. It becomes sinful when you defy the things you have to do. When you go and participate in at the temple or the tabernacle, when you're unclean, that's sin. And that's when you would have to be put out from the group. So again, those things are not sinful. Mark Guzik, he's one of my favorite commentators. He says it's important for us to regard these laws of cleanliness from a New Testament perspective. In Mark 7:1-9, Jesus criticized the Pharisees for their overemphasis on ceremonial cleanliness and their lack of regard for internal cleanliness. These laws were meant to have both hygienic benefits and spiritual applications. They were never intended as a way to get right with God. So, We are done with those chapters, thank goodness. Now we're on to other things. Thank goodness, it's something more pleasant. Well, pleasant and not pleasant in some ways. We're going to be talking about the Day of Atonement. This is the only chapter in the Bible that is actually dedicated to the Day of Atonement, although it never says Day of Atonement in here, but that's what it is. These chapters are in the center of Leviticus. Before this, we were talking about sacrifices and ritual purification. Now we're going to talk about the characteristics of living in this community. Verses 1 and 2. Oh yeah, we still got 10 minutes.
They closed my Bible.
Betty, that would be you.
Miss Betty.
Betty.
Oh.
Sorry.
No, I'm reading over here to myself. So how far do you want me to read?
Verse 1 and 2 in chapter 16.
Now the Lord spoke to Moses after the death of the two sons of Aaron, when they had approached the presence of the Lord and died. The Lord said to Moses, "Tell your brother Aaron that he shall not enter at any time into the holy place inside the veil before the mercy seat which is on the ark, or he will die. And I will appear in the cloud over the mercy seat."
So all those chapters, we're going back to the day after Nadab and Abihu are killed for approaching God in the wrong way.
Was done in that short period of time.
Well, one of the things about Moses and the way he wrote, it wasn't always chronologically.
Oh, okay.
It could have been all that conversation took place in a day, but not necessarily.
Okay.
And remember, they were killed because they approached God in the wrong way, back in Leviticus 10. So God wants to make sure they remember, come to me the right way. You come to me by my rules, not yours. He's now going to explain the right way to come. Aaron, or whoever was selected as high priest after him, they could only come to him at the right time and only at God's invitation. And the punishment Abihu and Nadab saw, death. So they approach him at the mercy seat. Whenever we see mercy seat, that is the lid of the Ark of the Covenant. It's the Holy of Holies. It's behind the fourth veil. No one but the high priest ever got to see it. Now, we're going to eventually get to the chapters where they talk about how they moved all this thing, so it'll be interesting to see how do they, when they move the ark, they're carrying it in a different way. But how do they do that in the right way? How do they open the Holy of Holies? How do they open the veil? That kind of thing, because they got to be really careful. We can still come to God at his invitation. That invitation now is open all the time because of Jesus. It's not one day a year. Romans 5:12 tells us that we have a standing invitation to God because of Jesus' work. But they had one day a year. Verses 3 through 5.
And in this way Aaron shall come into the holy place with a bull from the herd for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. He shall put on the holy linen coat and shall have the linen undergarment on his body, and he shall tie the linen sash around his waist and wear the linen turban. These are the holy garments. He shall bathe his body in water and then put them on. And he shall take from the congregation of the people of Israel 2 male goats for a sin offering and 1 ram for a burnt offering.
Okay, the Jews came to call this day the day, or Yoma in Hebrew. It's called a feast day, but there's no feast unto this day. It is a day of fasting. It's exactly 6 months after the Passover. It's in the month of Tishri, which is between mid-September to mid-October. So on the month of Tishri is it's the February of the Jews. It's the one with all the holidays in it. So the first day of the month, they start off by blowing their horns at the beginning of the new year, Rosh Hashanah. And then on the 10th day, it was the Day of Atonement, and then it was followed by the Feast of Tabernacles on the 15th of the month. And that lasted a week. So this year, the Day of Atonement will start on September 24th at sundown and end on September 25th at sundown. So coming up next September. So they start off with the sacrifice of a young bull by Aaron, for Aaron to atone for his own sin and those of his house. He had to be clean before he could atone for the others. He doesn't dress in his high priest outfit. None of the fancy stuff except that turban with the gold plate on it. That was the only thing that was from his other outfit. Other than that, he was dressed like a normal priest. It was a day of humbleness. So he didn't wear his glorious outfit. He took it off. Jesus, when he came to earth, left his glory behind. Let's see. So then he washes himself, and this was traditionally through immersion. Sounds like he bathed with his clothes on too. Kind of sounds like baptism. But we are going to stop there. And we'll pick up with the ceremony next week. Okay, I'm going to turn this off. Hi, everybody. Bye, everybody.